Huh? Huh?
Hi, Charlotte. Welcome to Many Questions, the show where we ask each guest many questions about themselves and their mental health journey. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm really well, thank you. I'm feeling pretty energized after a spin class this morning, so all good.
So, what attracted you to the field of positive psychology?
In essence, it started with my own mental ill health,
Hmm.
is where it all started. If we go back to 14 years, mental health wasn't even on my radar, if I say it. I didn't think mental health applied to me. And I was put into a role where I was given a huge amount of opportunity in a very short space of time. I was a designer in the fashion industry at the time and went from being a designer in a team to being leader of the whole design and production of the menswear department. So I was suddenly taken from, in essence, being one person in a team to knowing how to navigate managing people, managing multiple projects at the same time, working with different time zones. And it was a real opportunity that I wanted to make work. So I started to work longer and longer and longer hours, in essence, is how it started, which was very easy because I was working with different time zones. I was working with factories that were usually open on a weekend. So I started to do 6 days a week, 14, often 16 hours a day. I thought that was success. I was like, I'm important, things are going well, I'm thriving. And I knew it was stressful, but I thought that, I'm going to say, I glamorized the stress. There was something a bit like what you saw in the movies. So it was like, this is exciting, this is just what life is, and I've got this, and this is it. In hindsight, alongside that sense of this is difficult, but this is it, there was starting to be some signs that things weren't all good. And in terms of my physical health, started for the first time ever to really sort of fail me, in essence. I was starting to have food intolerances to all sorts of different foods, and I was cutting them out. But because I was traveling a lot, it was quite easily to blame, the dodgy water in this location or that thing I ate in that restaurant. I started to have a lot of back problems and hip problems. And I thought, oh, I must have just been running on uneven ground because I was often running in odd locations. I was like, oh, I must have just hurt myself. I remember going to the doctor and he told me it might be stress. And I remember snapping at him and telling me to give me more physio. And in hindsight, now I know that it was so related to stress. It makes me laugh at myself. But I didn't associate the physical illness and ill health with anything psychological. And I was becoming quite forgetful, but I thought I just had loads of stuff going on. And I was becoming quite irritable, but I honestly just thought people weren't pulling their weight because people weren't as committed as I was. And it was probably going on not for that long, probably maybe 3 months before I was forced to notice. And I say that because I was out in Indonesia at the time. I remember very specifically walking out of the factory at the end of the day. And I don't remember that there was anything specific that happened in the day that changed things for me, but I walked out of the factory and I was suddenly hit by a feeling of thinking I didn't want to live anymore. I couldn't keep going. I didn't know what to do with myself. I sort of walked out and I remember just thinking, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to be here. And in short, I've sort of gone into a long version of that, but it was my recovery from that moment, which included a diagnosis of anxiety and depression and a period of therapy. But it was a period which made me rethink mental health, in that it made me realize we all have it. It made me realize that for so many people, we wait till we're unwell to start looking after it. It introduced me to the concept that resilience wasn't something that you just get given. It's about a skill that you learn and you practice. And if you learn it and you practice it, you can actually get more done, be happier, be a better team member, be a better leader. And it introduced me to the field of positive psychology.
I just want to talk a little bit about what you was talking about before. It must have been quite a challenge being so successful and at that time wanted to kind of stop everything. Did you feel conflicted about slowing down or even stopping?
Well, I actually took a very different approach to my recovery. And I actually think one that's worth talking about. So I had that sort of moment outside the factory. And actually, I remember when two people came out of the factory, the two girls that I was living with at the time, and they tried to talk to me and I couldn't even speak because I'd got to that sort of level of just, say, disconnect between the parts of the brain that needed to function. And my doctor did recommend I had to do a sort of phone consultation with my doctor back in the UK, and was recommended I took time off work, but I said no. And so I didn't actually take time out through my recovery. What I did was I took the approach of, if I'm going to change and create changes that are going to be sustainable, I need to change when I'm doing my work.
Yeah.
And that's not what I was thinking at the time. Quite honestly, I didn't want to let people down. I was like, I can't stop. This is everything. How can I do that? But in hindsight, I'm very glad I didn't pause or take time off, because I think if I had taken my work away at that moment, I wouldn't have had a reason to keep getting out of bed every day.
Yeah.
It was so much a part of who I am. And I speak to more and more people. I do a lot of one-to-one coaching with people, and we talk about it, and they don't want to take time off. And it is partly because, they don't want to let people down. Partly though, it's because that sense of, if that's everything who you are, they don't know what the benefit of stopping is. And I think there's almost a misconception that to pause, we need to take huge chunks of time out of our work. And actually, some of the most powerful ways to pause are to change the cadence of how we're working on a day-to-day basis. And those were the sorts of changes I made to my life at that point. I started taking a 3-minute meditation break at 11 a.m. and a 3-minute break at 4 p.m. Had alarms set on my phone. It was manageable, workable, but it gave me these moments to reset my nervous system throughout the day. And that is often the power of those sorts of actions is really misunderstood. And people think that, to get over a burnout or a high stress experience, you have to take months off. And while there can be benefit for some people taking time off, very often those people don't make lifestyle changes. So when they come back to work, they just get right back to where they started. And actually making integrated changes which help people to stay stable. It might take, the sort of reset stage might take a little bit longer. It might take you a while to get back to your same level of thinking and engagement and motivation and all of those things. But when you get there, you're going to be at a stage that you can sustain those habits, and it makes you much more resilient and much more effective in the long term.
I guess for anybody who doesn't know what workplace burnout is, what is that?
So burnout is related to workplaces. That's fundamentally where the term has always started from. And it's the idea that someone, through unmanaged workplace stress, gets to a point where they are mentally feeling exhausted and physically exhausted. So exhaustion is one of the core symptoms. They're getting to a state where there's a sense of cynicism. So they stop seeing the value or the importance of their role or their job or their purpose. And then the third thing is inefficacy. So they believe they're not doing things as well as they should be, could be, would be. So you've got exhaustion, cynicism, and inefficacy are the three core symptoms that the World Health Organization define burnout as a syndrome. So it's not an illness, it is a syndrome. In essence, it's that these three things are happening for people, and that's subtly different to the symptoms of anxiety, which is more around worry and fear, or depression, which is more around low mood or numbness. So it is subtly different. And when someone's experiencing that, they will then have other symptoms that they might notice. Memory loss is a really common one, sleep issues, health issues, changes in how they're interacting with others, productivity and effective decision making, all sorts of other stuff. But for something to be diagnosed as burnout, they would need two of those three core symptoms. And it was first noticed in people in caring professions, primarily clergymen, hospital and medical workers, teachers, those sorts of fields. And then subsequent research has shown that it shows up for people in corporate settings. And the most recent wave of research is seeing that actually it applies often to parents, and they are starting to use the term parental burnout. So although it's not classic work in the sense that it's not a paid profession or a voluntary profession, there is an element that parents are working to bring their children up. Or so that's kind of I'm going to say the latest sort of round of research that I'm seeing is how does this apply in human settings with parents and other circumstances. And it's very, very prevalent. I also think it is a term that is at risk of being overused. And as a result, maybe the integrity of the word is being lost. I think a lot of people who have worked long hours feel exhausted, say, oh, I'm really burnt out, or I'm experiencing burnout. And that's something maybe different to a diagnosable or an actual burnout. I think there's something different. I also think we're seeing what maybe in the 80s and 90s, people used to say, sort of glorify stress, that stress was good because it meant you were important. I think we're seeing a bit of a glorification of burnout in some fields where people are quite proud that they're burnt out because they're working so hard. And then at the other end, I think there's a real awareness now from some top execs that doing more hours doesn't get more done. And the UK have some of the longest working hours of any country in Europe, and some of the lowest rates of productivity. So there's definitely not a direct correlation of getting up at 4 a.m, working till midnight and getting more done. Quite the opposite. Most of the studies are showing that once you're over about 50 hours a week, for every hour you're investing, you're actually not doing much. You're not getting much done. So your kind of productivity per hour is decreasing.
And it's true. I see a lot on social media nowadays, although this has kind of existed in different mediums, but the whole kind of grind culture where exactly what you say, you wake up at 4, you go to bed at midnight, I sleep when I'm dead, that type of thing. And it's just, all it does is popularize negativity and toxic work behaviors.
There's something that maybe we just need to explore as a community. I love productivity habits and productivity hacks, but also we're human, and there's nothing wrong with you if you don't always keep a perfect schedule every day and get up at 5 and do your 10 minutes of meditation and your 10 minutes of this and your 10 minutes of that. Like, you're by no means anything less, and you don't have to worry too much. We need to not get too worried about not doing all the things.
Yeah, absolutely. All it does is just build stress.
Yeah.
I guess talking about stress, what does stress do to your mental health?
Stress is a perception that we can't cope with certain circumstances that we're being exposed to. And it is a psychological and a physical reaction that we experience because our brain goes into fight, flight, or freeze. If in that moment we suddenly realize, and our kind of the thinking bit of our brain steps in and goes, oh no, we can cope with this, the pressure of a challenge can actually be really useful, and it helps us to think and solve problems and act in really quite courageous ways. If we really feel we can't, or if the stress is too excessive or too prolonged, then in those moments we start to kind of close down our thinking capacity, so we really can't cope with those moments. So it sort of becomes a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, not because we don't have the mental capacity, but because the parts of the brain we need to solve problems or deal with challenges are no longer accessible to us. So when people are constantly exposed to high levels of stress and there's not a reset moment, that's sort of what starts to happen. The brain starts to lose its power of problem solving and effective decision making because of this continued process. And at the same time, part of that process as the brain goes into panic mode is it shuts down certain parts of the body that it says aren't essential. So it shuts down parts of the reproductive system in order to save energy and send the energy to the parts that it feels are essentials. So there's all sorts of things that are going on physiologically and psychologically, which means if we're constantly exposed to high levels of pressure and stress without a reset, we start to become more and more susceptible to mental ill health. Patterns start to build in the brain where we're more susceptible to see problems, see things to worry about. Hormonal changes happen in the brain, so we aren't actually able to experience positive emotions. So there's kind of a complex chemical situation going on inside of us. And then there's these pathways that are building, which can potentially lead to mental illness or diagnosis. And I don't know enough about the complexities, but I know that most of the mental illnesses that we're aware of can be brought on or antagonized by high levels of persistent stress. However, short and valuable elements of our lives include moments of stress, doing something for the first time. It's stressful, it's scary, and then we feel really good because we've done it. And the stress that we experience when we're going into danger, it helps us to turn around and run the other way. So we need stress, but we need to be making sure that we're having reset moments so that we're not living in a state of perpetual stress.
Yeah, absolutely. If someone felt they're going through the stages of being burnt out, what can they do?
Well, on an individual level, I did a study with CEOs and senior leaders who had experienced a burnout. And we kind of, from that research, identified that there were 3 really core aspects that an individual could focus on to look after themselves and help their recovery. And there are also 3 good things to prevent ill health arising or burnout arising. So vaults being energy management, understanding physical and emotional energy. Physical energy being the power of short breaks, the importance of sleep, the importance of nutrient-rich food to give us the right fuel. So all of those components of keeping the body and the mind functioning effectively. And really, when I say, taking breaks and resetting and all of that stuff, it is properly switching off and making sure that becomes a priority, not a nice to have. Energy management on the emotional side is understanding that managing emotions, suppressing emotions particularly, is very cognitively exhausting. And a lot of people, when they're going through difficult experiences, they're not expressing the emotions they feel because they think they should be able to cope, or they're worried about expressing emotions in their workplace. And the drain on their energy by trying to suppress and control rather than consciously express emotions is really, really debilitating. So understand effective emotional expression and emotional literacy as a component of your energy management. As an individual watching this, know what you need to do to put into place to make sure you're re-energizing physically, but also find a way to express your emotions as well. The second area is values. So that's understanding where you are not living in alignment with your values and your strengths. And when I say strengths, I don't mean your skills, I mean your character strengths, the things that light you up, the qualities about yourself that you love and make you who you are. If you're not allowing them to come into your day-to-day habits, your day-to-day behaviors, that is going to take a toll on your psychological health. So making sure you're living in alignment with that. And it doesn't matter what your organization is doing in terms of your own capacity. You can still make sure you're bringing kindness, honesty, integrity, social intelligence into your interactions. So make sure you're doing those things. And then the third thing, vulnerability, is understanding your own your own fallibility, really understanding that you too are human and you can't look after everyone, give for everything, be all things to all people. You have to look after yourself and put your own oxygen mask on first, and find someone who you can express that vulnerability to and talk to about the fact that you are struggling or finding things hard or dealing with challenges, because there's a huge body of research around even the process of expressing it out loud and saying it to someone helps the nervous system to kind of reset and feel, actually, I'm a bit more in control. I'm a bit more it's okay. I'm safe. And that it establishes a bit of a psychological safety within your context. So finding someone you can talk to. So vaults, values, and vulnerability.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Charlotte, for this amazing conversation. Thank you for sharing your story once again. If anybody wanted to get in touch with you or find out a little bit more about you, how could they do so?
My website's charlottewiseman.com. So that's relatively easy. Just absolutely Charlotte Wiseman, as it sounds, WISEMAN.com. And you can contact me directly through the website or send me an email, charlotte@charlottewiseman.com. And I'm also pretty easily findable on LinkedIn. So I'm often commenting on the MQ podcasts or comments on their different posts. And equally on Instagram, it's Charlotte Wiseman _. So please do reach out. I'd love to hear people's thoughts, answer any more questions, and connect with some of the people who have listened.
Okay, well, thank you so much for sitting down with us. And I hope you have a great day.
Thank you, and you.